The little bell above the cafe door rang, but it wasn't a nice, soft sound. It was loud and sharp, almost like a scream. 5 men walked inside. They weren't friendly. They wore black leather jackets covered in dirt, like they had been riding motorcycles for hours. Their boots hit the floor hard, making deep thud sounds with every step. It was like a warning telling everyone in the room, we are in charge now. At the front of the group was a man with bright red hair. It wasn't a neat red like a shiny apple. It was wild and messy, like a fire that had burned too long. His eyes moved slowly around the room, looking at everyone like he owned the place. He looked like the kind of man who liked people to be afraid of him. His name was Rusty. At the back of the cafe, a man in a hoodie sat alone, sipping his coffee. No one paid much attention to him. He looked quiet, almost invisible. But his name was Keanu, and he was watching everything. The other 4 men spread out. One of them was huge, like a walking wall of muscle. Another had heavy metal chains wrapped around one arm that clinked when he moved. They didn't have to say anything. Just standing there made people nervous. The barista behind the counter, a young woman who had been smiling just moments ago, suddenly looked stiff. The old man with the newspaper lowered it slightly, peeking over the top, but his hands had stopped turning the pages. Even the couple sitting by the window leaned into each other, trying to make themselves small, like they wished they could disappear. But there was one person who didn't move, Marissa. She sat alone at a table near the front. Her brown hands rested on a stack of papers, gripping them tightly. Her dark eyes were tired, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was pregnant, her belly round under a soft pink cardigan. Her shoes were simple, worn out but neatly tied. She wasn't rich, but she took care of herself. Marissa didn't look up at the men. She didn't have to. She already knew who they were. Rusty smirked, his eyes settling on her. His voice was loud, making sure the whole cafe could hear him. "Wow," he said. "Didn't know this place gave out free stuff now." One of his friends laughed. Another leaned on the counter, knocking over the tip jar without a second glance. Coins rolled onto the floor, but nobody bent down to pick them up. Rusty took a step closer to Marissa's table. He looked her up and down, his grin widening. "You look tired," he said. His eyes flicked to her belly. "Rough night? Or is your whole life rough?" Keanu, still sitting in the back, didn't move. His hand stayed on his coffee cup, but under the table, his thumb hovered near his phone. "Not yet." "What's in the folder?" another one of the men asked. His voice was mocking, like he already knew the answer. "Papers for free money? Child support? Food stamps?" They laughed again. It wasn't the kind of laugh people share when something is funny. It was mean, sharp, the kind of laugh that makes a person feel small. Marissa's fingers tightened around the papers. Slowly, carefully, she closed the folder as if sealing something important inside. She lifted her chin just slightly and looked at Rusty. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but firm. "Leave me alone." Rusty's smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew wider. He took another step toward her. "Nah," he said. "I think we're just getting started." No one in the cafe spoke. No one moved. It was like the air itself had turned to stone. Keanu, still sitting in the corner, still invisible, was paying close attention. He saw how the other customers shrank in their seats. He saw how the barista looked down, afraid to get involved. He saw how Marissa, despite her exhaustion, didn't back down. He could feel it now, like a warning in his bones. Rusty was about to do something really bad. Keanu's hand, still under the table, slid across his phone. One tap. Silent signal sent. Help was on the way. Rusty leaned forward over the table, bringing his face close to Marissa's. "You've got guts," he said. "Too bad you don't have much else." Then, before anyone could stop him, he grabbed Marissa's mug of tea and threw it at her. The hot liquid splashed across her chest. For a second, everything in the cafe froze. Marissa gasped, sucking in a sharp breath as the burning tea soaked into her clothes. She flinched but didn't cry out. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. Rusty laughed. His friends chuckled too, their shoulders shaking like this was all just a game. But Keanu wasn't laughing. He put down his coffee. Then, slowly, he stood up. The cafe was silent, except for the quiet scrape of his chair as it slid across the floor. Rusty turned, surprised. It was the first time he had even noticed Keanu was there. Just another man in a hoodie. Another tired customer sipping his coffee. But now Keanu wasn't sitting. Now he was standing. And everything had changed. Rusty narrowed his eyes. "What do you want?" Keanu didn't answer. He just took a step forward. One of Rusty's friends shifted uncomfortably. He could feel it too. Something about this man was different. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't making threats. He was just there, calm and still, like a storm that hadn't started yet. Rusty scoffed. You think you're a hero or something? Keanu still didn't speak. Another step. Closer now. Rusty's smirk twitched just slightly. Then Keanu moved. It happened so fast that no one saw it coming. 1 second, Rusty was standing there, full of confidence. The next, Keanu had grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and slammed it down against the table. Rusty yelped. The cafe gasped. Before Rusty's friends could react, Keanu had already turned, his foot sweeping under the nearest man's leg, sending him crashing to the floor. Another reached for him, but Keanu ducked, moving faster than their eyes could follow. A sharp elbow to the ribs sent the third man stumbling backward. The one with the chains lunged. Keanu caught the chain midair, yanked it forward, and sent the man tumbling into a table, coffee cups crashing to the floor. Rusty scrambled back, gripping his wrist where Keanu had slammed it. His face was pale now, the confidence gone. Keanu took one last step, standing directly over him. His voice was quiet, steady. Leave. Rusty swallowed. Then, without another word, he turned and ran. His friends scrambled after him, limping, clutching bruises, tripping over chairs in their rush to escape. The bell above the cafe door jingled as they disappeared. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the cafe breathed again. Keanu turned to Marissa. Are you okay? He asked. She looked at him, eyes wide. Then she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Keanu just nodded back, then picked up his coffee, took one last sip, and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. But no one in that cafe would ever forget the quiet stranger in the hoodie. The cup hit the floor, spinning before it stopped. A sharp scream followed, not loud but strong enough to cut through the air. Marissa jumped back, holding her stomach. Her clothes were wet, steam rising from the spilled tea. An old man dropped his newspaper. A couple near the window froze, unsure if they should run or stay. The barista gasped, covering her mouth. And Keanu? Keanu stood up. No shouting. No big speech. Just the soft sound of his chair sliding on the floor as he got to his feet. Rusty, the biker, didn't look at him. Not yet. He was still staring at Marissa, enjoying the damage. One of his biker friends laughed. Another moved toward Marissa, reaching for the folder she was holding. Keanu moved across the room, smooth like water. Quiet, calm. Until he was standing between them and her. Back off, Keanu said. Now they finally noticed him. One of the bikers, a big guy named Vince with a buzz cut, snorted. Who do you think you are? Her boyfriend? Another laughed. Go sit down, old man. Keanu didn't answer. He just moved. Vince swung first. Big mistake. Keanu ducked under the punch, stepped in, and slammed his elbow into Vince's ribs. The air rushed out of Vince's lungs as he bent over in pain. Keanu grabbed the back of Vince's head and slammed it into the table. Vince dropped like a sack of bricks. Rusty spun around. Wow, what the heck? The other bikers flinched. Two stepped forward. One reached inside his jacket. Another grabbed a chair. Keanu didn't wait. He sidestepped, grabbed the biker's wrist, twisted, clang, a knife hit the ground. Keanu pushed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him crashing into a table. The last two bikers hesitated. Finally, Rusty looked at Keanu. Really looked. Something flickered in his eyes. First confusion, then anger, and then something else. Recognition. You just made a mistake, Rusty said, reaching into his jacket. Keanu's eyes flicked down for just a second. A gun. Keanu shifted, moving to shield Marissa behind him. She was still shaking, clutching her belly with one hand and the folder with the other. Keanu's voice was steady. Don't. Rusty grinned. Too late. He pulled out the gun. But Keanu was already moving. Not toward Rusty, toward the moment. Toward time itself. Because outside, just down the street, two black SUVs were already turning the corner. Rusty tightened his grip on the gun. Marissa gasped, backing up against the counter. The whole room held its breath. Keanu stood relaxed, like he wasn't worried at all. But his eyes stayed locked on the gun. His body was ready. You really want to do this? Keanu asked, voice low. You want to be a killer now? Rusty sneered. I want you on the floor. The gun twitched in his hand. Outside, tires rolled over pavement. No screeching brakes. No sirens. Just presence. Then, ding. The little bell over the cafe door rang softly. Everyone turned. Two men stepped inside. Black suits. Earpieces. Cold, unreadable eyes. Rusty blinked. His gun lowered just a little. Then the third man entered. He was older. Tall. Broad shoulders under a charcoal gray coat. silver streaks in his beard. No gun. No armor. Just a steady walk and a stare sharp enough to cut steel. Marcus Rayburn. He didn't look at Keanu. Not yet. He didn't need to. He looked at Rusty. Put the gun down, son. Rusty flinched like the words hit him. Who the heck are you? Rusty snapped, trying to raise the gun again. But his hand was shaking now. Marcus stepped forward just once. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You're standing in front of someone I owe a blood debt to, Marcus said. That means right now you're standing in the wrong place saying the wrong things. One of the bikers, still conscious on the floor, suddenly realized who he was. His face went pale. Rusty, he whispered. That's Marcus Rayburn. Marcus Rayburn. The color drained from Rusty's face. Then he looked at Keanu again. Really looked. The way he stood. The way he moved. The way he fought. It hit him like a punch to the gut. No, Rusty muttered. Wait, are you? Keanu lifted his chin slightly. The light caught his face. Rusty stumbled back. You're Keanu Reeves. Silence. Heavy. Heavier than a gunshot. Marcus raised an eyebrow, finally glancing at Keanu with the tiniest smile. You didn't tell them? Marcus asked. Keanu shrugged. Didn't seem necessary. Marcus chuckled. They're slow learners. Then Marcus turned back to Rusty. Last chance. Clatter. Rusty dropped the gun. And just like that, the bikers lost all control. The men in suits moved in. Quick. Silent. No struggle. In seconds, Rusty and his crew were on the ground, hands tied behind their backs. Rusty fought against the zip ties, but weakly, more instinct than resistance. His eyes darted from Marcus to Keanu and back again, like a man realizing he'd been swimming with sharks and thought they were just shadows. The other bikers were already being dragged outside. Vince was barely awake, blood drying on his face. One tried to mumble something about a mistake. The men in suits didn't answer. They just did their job. Rusty was the last to go. Two men grabbed him under the arms, ready to haul him out. Wait, he growled, voice breaking. This ain't over. Keanu was now helping Marissa sit down. She was shaking. Soaked in tea. But alive. Keanu's hand hovered near her shoulder. Not touching. Just there. Rusty spat on the floor, chest heaving. You think you won? He hissed. Just 'cause you've got your little suits and fancy cars? You think this ends here? He glared at Keanu. I know people too, Rusty growled. You'll pay for this. You especially. You Reeves. For the first time since the fight started, Keanu turned to look at him. He walked toward Rusty, not fast, not scary, just like he couldn't be stopped. He moved with the kind of calm that made Rusty's stomach twist. It wasn't anger, it wasn't rage. It was something worse, something unshakable. Keanu stopped just inches from Rusty, looking him in the eyes. He said nothing. That silence crushed Rusty more than a punch would have. It was heavy, pressing down on him, making his throat dry and his legs stiff. Then finally Keanu spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. You don't even know who you're messing with today. Rusty forced a grin, trying to shake off the fear creeping up his spine. Oh, I know exactly who. Marcus stepped forward before Rusty could finish, cutting him off. No, you don't. Marcus looked down at Rusty like he was nothing, like he was already forgotten. You walked into a room with a woman stronger than you'll ever be, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. And a man who's already lived through the kind of nightmare you're trying to put him through. He shook his head. Do you really think a threat matters to someone like that? Rusty opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands curled into fists, but they shook slightly. Marcus gave a small nod. Take him. The men standing behind Marcus moved quickly, grabbing Rusty by the arms. He struggled at first, but it was useless. As they dragged him toward the door, his voice cracked. It was supposed to sound tough, but it came out weak, desperate. You'll see. You'll regret this, Reeves. This isn't over. Keanu didn't blink. It is. The door slammed shut behind them. The room went still. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the kind that made your skin crawl. Not the kind that made you hold your breath. No, this quiet felt lighter, like something dark had been scrubbed away. Keanu turned back to Marissa. She was still holding that soaked folder, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her breathing was fast. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low. She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. She had heard his name whispered by the others just moments ago. And now she understood why. You're really him, she murmured. Keanu gave a small smile. I'm just a guy who likes coffee. The cafe looked like it had been hit by a storm. Chairs knocked over. A table cracked. Coffee spilled across the floor. One of the windows had a spiderweb crack, spreading out from the corner like frozen lightning. The couple who had been sitting near it? Gone. The old man in the corner? Vanished. Behind the counter, the barista peeked out. His face was pale, but he was breathing. And somehow, even with all the mess, the air felt calm again. Keanu moved slowly, helping Marissa into a chair. He didn't rush her. He didn't ask too many questions. He just let her have a moment. She grabbed a napkin, dabbing at the wet spot on her shirt. When she touched the burned area, she winced. Her hands were still shaking. "I'm okay," she whispered. But it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself. Keanu crouched in front of her, not too close, not towering over her, just steady. Just a present. "You're braver than most people I've met," he said. Marissa let out a weak laugh. "I'm just tired, that's all." "No," Keanu said, shaking his head. "You stood up to them when no one else did. That's not tired. That's brave." Her eyes welled with tears. She looked away quickly, blinking fast like she didn't want to let them fall. They said things," she whispered. "Things I've heard before. I told myself it didn't bother me anymore. But then he poured that tea on me and I just froze." Keanu didn't answer right away. He let the silence sit between them, not the awkward kind. Not the scary kind. The real kind. The kind that listens. "It's okay to freeze," he said finally. "You didn't run. You didn't break. That's what matters." She looked at him again. Her eyes were red, but she didn't look away this time. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Keanu tilted his head slightly as if the question surprised him. "Because no one else was going to," he said. "And you didn't deserve to go through that alone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper. The kind used for receipts. He borrowed a pen from the barista, scribbled something down and passed it to her. Marissa opened it. "To Marissa, the strongest heart I've seen today. Care." Her lip trembled. "You didn't have to." "Neither did you," Keanu said simply. "But you stood up anyway." She clutched the note tight like it was something priceless. Maybe it was. Keanu stood up, adjusted his hoodie and glanced toward the door. Outside, the world was already moving on. A jogger ran past. A dog barked. The city didn't care about what had just happened. "Will I ever see you again?" Marissa asked. Keanu gave her a look that was part smile, part apology. "Probably not. But you'll be just fine." Then he turned, pushed the door open, and stepped into the morning light. Marcus Raburn stood by the door, his coat draped over one arm. He had never really planned to stay long. He watched Keanu disappear down the sidewalk, then turned back to Marissa. His expression softened. Not the look of a man who built his life through fear. Something else. Something quieter. "You did good," he said. Marissa blinked. "I didn't do anything." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You didn't back down. That's something." He glanced at the cracked window where the sunlight now shone through the broken glass. "You know," he said, voice low, "back in my day power meant fear. Loud voices. Loud fists. We thought that made us strong." He shook his head. "But real strength." He looked at her. "It's quiet. It stands when everything else falls." Marissa didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Marcus gave her one last look, part respect, part warning. "Take care of that baby. And take care of yourself. You've already done the hard part." Then he turned and stepped outside. His men followed, slipping into their black SUVs like shadows disappearing into the morning. Engines purred. Within seconds they were gone. No sirens. No news crews. Just the smell of spilled coffee. And something else in the air, something heavier than smoke, something quieter than fear. The feeling that things could have gone very, very wrong. But they didn't. Marissa sat for a long time. She looked down at the note again. "To Marissa, the strongest heart I've seen today." Her fingers brushed over the ink, like she was afraid it might fade away. Then, for the first time in a long time, she smiled. A real one. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. The cafe was quiet again. A mop swiped across the floor. The barista picked up broken mugs, flipping chairs upright. Somewhere in the background, soft jazz hummed from a single working speaker. Marissa sat still, the folded note warm in her palm. She didn't need to read it again. She already knew every word. And maybe that was the point. Because this wasn't just about a fight in a cafe, or a famous man stepping in. It was about what happens when we choose to see people. To stand up when no one else will. To be quiet, steady, and strong. Keanu didn't want thanks. He didn't want attention. He just did what was right. And maybe the lesson is this: when the world goes quiet and someone needs help. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.